Hard Refresh.
Hi, and welcome back to the Hard Refresh podcast, videocast, whatever we call it nowadays. As you can see, we are remote. We're still in COVID. I know if you guys have been looking through these videos, it may only seem about 45 minutes, but it's been about a year. We have been out of commission for a little while since our last recording, but we are back, and we will be recording regularly and getting out this really cool, fun content, at least for us, out to you guys. We are continuing our discussions on Aria labels and accessibility with my partner in crime, Nick Lundy, who will be going through. I guess we're still working on that demo site that you built. Right?
Exactly.
Right, cool.
Yeah. So we've got like this fake blog that is going to be the most accessible blog ever.
and those of you absolutely realize how great Nick sounds. Got a good mic. Nick, are you drinking anything this?
I am. Yeah. So
What
I've
do you
got
got?
it in a Darth Vader koozie, but this is Margarita Ghost. It's refreshingly tart, and it's from Cigar City Brewing.
Is that a sour?
Florida. It is a sour. Yeah, it's kind of like a sour. It's a
I
ghost.
don't like
Yeah,
sours.
I love them.
I've got in my chalice glass, but this is a Blue Moon mango wheat,
Very nice.
which is actually quite refreshing. You wouldn't think it.
Mm.
You're like, mango wheat, really? But no, it's really good. So all that out of the way.
Yeah.
Why don't you kick us off? What do we?
Sure. So
What are
the
we doing
last
today?
couple of times we talked about Aria attributes, and we talked about Aria being accessible, rich application attributes that are really for when we start going from the web as being static to now being really another platform for applications. So things are changing, things are moving. I remember back when I was in college, they called it DHTML, right? Because it was dynamic. And,
yeah, I remember having Dreamweaver, and like you would be able to code stuff in Well, you wouldn't actually code it in
Right.
DHTML. You would choose something, and it would write out all the code for you.
and it had all the libraries.
It had all of it in. Yeah, dynamic HTML, right?
Right. And so the thing that we're doing now is we're making sure that all of these changes, and I'll give you an example, for example, we're pushing a button. We want to make sure that the things that we do in our CSS and our JavaScript to tell a sighted user that something has changed, we want to make sure that the same people that are using assistive technologies like screen readers, for example, are getting that same change and that we're communicating that same information. And you kind of have to do it a little differently, and you have to do it programmatically.
So this is somebody seeing a hover state on a button, a press state on a button. You're just used to that as a typical sighted user. You see all that happen, but this is a way to tell the browser what state it's in, so the non-sighted user actually gets that feedback information.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Cool.
let me give you,
All right, that's
let me
very
give you an example, and we're going to kind of code this example together.
Wait a minute. You're going to do live code?
I'm going to do live code, and then
Crazy.
Shaq is going to edit it to
You're
make it
crazy.
look amazing. So,
All right.
so on our awesome fake blog, which I'm going to just start editing right now, we've got this post from already. I want to change this. This is from 2014. We're going to make this from now.
Okay. So, all right. So while you're doing that, I'm just going to describe what's going on here for
Sure.
folks listening in the audio realm. So we're looking at our demo Hard Refresh blog post. You've got a sample blog post. You've got a Superman video, because Nick is a huge fan of Superman. And right now, what we're going to do is start editing into this page to add in these Aria labels that indicate button states, right? Okay.
So I've got this video here, and this is a cartoon from the 40s. These are those Fleischer Studios cartoons, and they recently actually went back to the original reels and remastered them.
Huh.
So I thought a cool way to show what I want to build, which is basically a toggle button, is to start looking at, how do we hit a button and then communicate to a screen reader that the button is in a pressed state. So pressed is not something that's native HTML. This is, something that developers have gone out of their way to say, hey, you know what? Let's make a button look like a toggle button, basically, that has an on state and an off state.
Right.
So here's what I've got right now behind the scenes is I've got 2 videos. And let me pull up where I have the video. So I've got this separate video include here, and I've got 2 iframes here. This is the original version of the Mad Scientist cartoon, and then here is the remastered one.
Oh, okay. So what now? Okay, so what you're doing from a UI standpoint is you want to create a toggle switch that allows you to toggle between the original and the remastered.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and so there's one thing I do want to talk about. When you start building one of these controls, you may think like this is kind of tough. How do I do it? What are the rules? And you're not reinventing the wheel here. These are components that other people have built, and on top of that, there's actually guidelines. There's a couple of guidelines actually on how to build these kinds of components. So I actually want to, for the first time, show you the guidelines that I'm looking at, and then
don't do that. You're showing how the sausage is made. You're revealing the secrets. If those that kind of are interested in this stuff and are watching this realize that, and it's not a bad thing. Programmers are lazy. That's actually a good thing. So when you're developing, or so developers are lazy, programmers are lazy, that you want to create things that are reusable, so you don't have to do the boring grunt stuff over and over again. Right. And the beautiful thing about the web is that if you make something, you put it out there and say, oh, here, I figured this out. Go ahead and use it.
And you may, once you start looking at these articles, you may say, hey, I never need to watch a hard refresh video again. But
no, you have to keep watching it because of our sparkling personalities.
Yeah, I hope so. So there's 2.
Plus the musical segment at the end. They don't know about that yet.
Oh yeah, where I play drums behind me, right? And you
yes.
play ukulele.
And I play the uke.
So there's 2 documents that I want to talk about. So the first is this WAI Aria, and this is where they go into all the different Aria attributes that we've been talking about and all the roles. So a role is an attribute that takes anything that's like a div or even a button or any other element, and it turns it into another element and basically tells the assistive technology that, hey, this div is actually a button, or this group of divs with divs and nested inside it, they're actually a list, something like that.
Right.
So the Aria attribute that we're looking for now is Aria pressed.
So what you're looking at right now is the W3C guidelines for this, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. Yes. This is basically the standards group for the web. So the web is open source. Essentially, these are the folks that say, this is how you should do it, or you follow these standards. That way it's not a Wild West.
Yeah. And when we code, we often run our HTML and our CSS through these validators. And I can't tell you how much I learned about HTML just by running it through a validator and it telling me, no, you can't do this and you can't have this nested inside that.
Yep.
So that's another great document, is just, the W3C basically puts out all the standards for HTML, CSS, and then they have the WCAG guidelines, which we've talked about, which are your web content accessibility guidelines. So here, these are the kind of extra attributes that you can use to make your code even more accessible and even more semantic to assistive technologies. And you may not know when to use them. I mean, this is really thick stuff. So sometimes it's good to kind of drill down and look exactly what you're looking for and not trying to digest this whole page.
By the way, this is why you need to watch the hard refresh.
Yeah, exactly. But another thing you can do is this other one, and it's a much easier read. And this is the authoring practices for Aria.
Right.
And the authoring practices are basically every single kind of widget that you would want to build. So they've got checkboxes. If you wanted to build a custom checkbox out of spans and divs, this is how you do it. Or button, alerts. They've got carousels in here, and they've got buttons that I want to go into. But Chuck, you know how like sometimes you say, how can I tell if this carousel is accessible? You wish there was a checklist.
Yeah.
For all of these are the features of an accessible carousel or accessible whatever widget you're building. They've got the example, they've got the terms, these are all definitions. This is how a keyboard should interact with it. And then on top of that, here are your Aria roles, states and properties that you would need to look up in this document. These are the ones that you would be using. And they just basically go through with examples. This is what it has to do. This is how a keyboard user needs to interact with it. And this is how a screen reader user needs to interact with it, et cetera. So I kind of want to use this document to build something. I'm not going to build it entirely from scratch, but I kind of want to show basically what the process would be if you were to build something else and you wanted to build it accessibly. So let's go.
Let's see it.
All right, I'm going to button. Okay, so now here, I'm not going to just I'm not going to just share that screen. But what I'm going to just say is that this text is actually about how to build a button if you were to build it from a standard div. So there's a lot of things that we're going to skip over that don't apply because we're going to start with a real button, but we're going to add functionality that real buttons don't have, which is that toggle.
So when you say a real button, you mean a button element?
A button element, yes.
Right,
exactly.
as opposed to a div role equals button or something like that.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, so let's dig into it. So it says a button is a widget that enables a trigger or an action element, such as submitting a form, opening a dialog, canceling an action, performing a delete operation. The way I like to think about this, and I talk to developers who have been developing 5-10 years, and we still talk about this. A button is something that does something when you're on the same page, and it keeps you on the same page. And a link, which sometimes people use, or a div or whatever, but a link takes you away from this page. And a div is really just something that's supposed to be a visual or some kind of, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we've experienced code from other developers where everything was a div.
Right.
Even links were divs. They weren't actually links. They weren't actually tags, which was painful.
And another common one is to make buttons links. Or vice versa. All right. So, just because it's styled to look like a button in the sense that it has a box, but if it takes you to a different page, it should be a link.
I like the idea of having a semantic description of what a button is as opposed to a link. That way it's very clear that, this thing is going to take me off page. It's got to be a link.
Yeah.
Or this button is going to keep me here, or this thing's going to keep me here, then it's a button.
Yeah. And there's a really, really subtle interaction difference. When you get to a button, you could press either enter or space to activate the button. With links, you can only press enter. So if you use a link and have it, let's say, launch a modal or reveal like an accordion, it natively, that link is only going to work on enter.
And is that the enter and the space is specific to screen readers?
No, just keyboard users in general. Yeah.
So if you're on a button, I can hit the space bar and
hit the space bar.
And it will, really?
Yeah.
You learned something new, Nick.
Yeah. And so here they talk about that right here. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Keyboard interaction for buttons. Space activates the button and enter activates the button. So you can see these are kind of your rules for how to get it to work.
Nice.
If you were to make this button create something like open a dialogue, it even talks about the fact that it should focus on the new dialogue. So there's lots of things here that if you were, based on your context of what you were trying to build, there's some other things here. The button should have a role of button is one of the first things that they talk about when talking about role states and properties.
So you have to have a button, role equals button?
So if it was a div, it would need role equals button or span or link or whatever. But if you natively use the button element, you don't need that property. And it's just
Got it. Okay.
ignored. So the other thing that a button needs is an accessible label. So by default, it says that accessible name is the text within the button. So this is super important for when we use a button that has no text. So like a close button or a hamburger menu.
I was going to say like a button has no text. Why would that be? Oh, a little just like you see it all the time in X.
Yeah. Sometimes we even use CSS to make that X or there's literally nothing in the button.
Right, but you so this would be a toggle for a window shade too, right? To open and close a window shade. Okay, got it. All right, which is usually just a chevron pointing down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Got it.
So this is just other advice for when you're building buttons. Make sure it has an accessible name. So that's text inside the button. Or you can put something we talked about previously, Aria labeled by Aria or Aria label. Aria label by pointing to something else that has that text, or Aria label means you type it right in there.
Yep.
So for this button, we're using a straight up standard button and the text is right inside it. It's going to say 4K mastered. So we don't have to do any of this stuff.
So do you want to, let's see the code for that button.
Sure. And I have almost nothing.
But that's okay.
But that's okay. Hold on. Let's see. So I'm going into let me stop sharing this and share my full screen. Okay. All right. So I've got my pressed button and all I've done is select it and that's pretty much it. So the last thing that I want to talk about is this last one. I'm going to just jump down. If the button is a toggle button, it has an Aria press state. And when the button is toggled on, it has a value of true. And when it's off, it has a state of false. So this is what we're looking at. And this is what we're going to use here. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is let's make this actually work to toggle the, I'm sorry, the two videos. So I'm going to, let's close this out. And
Shaq's eye is twitching right now. You're doing live code.
Let's see. So
it's gonna go so wrong.
Okay, so let's put some IDs on these so I can just select these. So this is going to be video ridge, and then
camel case. I like it.
Yeah. And this will be video remaster.
Got it.
Okay. All right. So by default, this video ridge has, it's the video remaster that has display none. Right. So we're going to toggle that.
Is this, are those just Bootstrap classes? Or no?
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah, those are classes from Bootstrap 4.
All right, so D-none which is actually one of the really cool things about these frameworks is that a lot of these de facto type of classes are already included.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I'm going to just do toggle class and
that's your rap name, by the way, D-none.
And so let's see if this works so far. Cool. I'm going to hit it and okay, so what we have here is we've got a button with an ID of enable remaster, and we've got two containers, video remaster, which we're going to toggle the display none class, and then another video, the original video, and we're going to just toggle that display none class. And then on top of that, we're going to toggle a class here. This is really just for the visual visitor to this site. We're going to just change the way this button looks. So we're going to toggle this class too, pressed. And here we've got another spot where we've got our CSS. And so for pressed, we're using the background Superman red and the color white. And on hover and focus, we're going to darken that same Superman red 10%.
Got it.
All right. And so I'm going to refresh here. And so we have the original version of the video available, right? And then you click 4K remaster and we switch to the remastered version. So that's a pretty simple button and how we would normally make it.
Cool.
Now we're going to make it accessible too. And the way to do that is also to add first. So let's actually just check here. We're doing Aria pressed, and Aria pressed false is going to be our default. And then we've got true for when it is pressed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump down to this button and I'm going to put aria.pressed equals true.
So Aria dash pressed.
Aria dash pressed and actually the default state is going to be false. So without this attribute, a screen reader would get to it and it would just say button 4K remastered, and it's not going to say is it pressed, is it not pressed, even though visually, you know, we're making it red when it's pressed.
Right. So a non-sighted user will click that button and they won't get any feedback to know, so they don't know what's going on.
Right. Exactly.
Got it. Okay. Got it.
Cool. So I've got Aria pressed equals false. And then now I'm also going to do that here. So let's actually do, let's actually collect that value. So let's set it to the attribute of Aria pressed. And if this is equal to false, we'll set it to true.
Right. This is the way to make sure that, so when that page loads, you're collecting the fact that it's false. But if it was pressed, when you press it again, it's looking to see what it is. It's not going to find. It's going to be true. So the if is not going to work. So there has to be an else on that, right? Or
yep. Let's
right.
do that. Oh well, actually, it's just going to be the reverse here. Like
right.
That. So this is on click if we're getting the Aria press state of this button.
Yep.
And if it's false, then we're going to set it to true, and we're basically just toggling this.
Yep.
Okay. Cool.
So I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Couldn't you have just done? Is there there's a toggle class function? Is there a toggle attribute?
Toggle attribute? I don't know.
Okay.
We could write one. We could write a toggle attribute function.
Right. Sure.
But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but basically, this is in effect doing that.
Right.
Okay. So let's go back and I'm going to refresh this, and I'm going to actually inspect here before. I was going to say,
is it screen reader time?
Yeah, it's almost screen reader time. First, I just want to inspect here, so it's false, and then I hit the button, and hold on. All right. So we're inspecting. It's false right now. I hit the button, and now it's pressed true.
Right.
All right, cool. And let's test it out with a screen reader.
All right, here we go.
So I'm going to press on Mac. I'm going to hit Command F5 to turn on VoiceOver.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Hard refresh template. Google Chrome window. Hard refresh template. Selected tab.
And I'm going to open up the router. So the router is what we talked about on our last hard refresh. It's you hit Control Option and U, and it gives you all these menus. And the first menu here is form controls, but if I push right and left, I can get to other menus like headings and all the links on the page, things like that. So I'm going to go right down to 4K remastered toggle button. And normally what you could do is you could, if you didn't want to use that, you could also hold down Control Option. And if you were reading all the content of the page, you could also hit Control Option and hit right.
Scientist original group. You are currently in YouTube frame and the Superman 4K remastered toggle button. You are currently on toggle button. To select or deselect this checkbox, press Control Option Space.
So it announces it as a toggle button, even though there's nothing in my code that literally says toggle button. All it says is Aria toggle equals false right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to basically hit space.
Selected 4K remastered toggle button.
And it says selected. Let's see.
Select 4K remastered toggle button. Toggle button.
Oh, it says deselect. Chuck, you're right.
So that's what it's doing. It's giving you select and deselect.
Yeah, I think that's it. You were 100% right. So it looks like what happened.
It didn't do what you expected it to do, which was say pressed, but in Chrome.
Yeah.
Oh no, we're in Safari now.
Yeah.
It's saying deselect and select, which is what it was doing in Chrome.
Right.
So
it looks like it does work here. It says deselect and the action is going to be to deselect it.
Right.
And now the action could be to select it, I guess. Which is kind of...
It seemed... I think that is... I don't think that's the action. I think that is select is the state and deselect is the state.
Sorry.
I think it worked.
Yeah, I think it worked.
I think it worked. It was just not what we expected.
Just not what we expected. Okay.
So, you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say they did a nightly build. And we just got surprised on that.
Okay. So the next Aria attribute, can we skip to the next one? Is that
Moving
right?
Moving on. Yeah. Let's go. All right. So, all right.
In closing.
In closing, things don't always work the way you want them to work, right? So let's move on to the next attribute.
Yeah. So the next attribute is actually super similar in the sense that compatibility has been all over the place. So this is Aria modal equals true. And Aria modal is basically a signal to screen readers, assistive technologies that the div that is now in view is a modal, and that everything else, once you're focused inside it, everything else should be ignored.
Okay, so let's dig down on that right now, because modals have become very, very popular. In the old days, it was you would just spawn a new window. And then with the advent of DHTML, you could have a div or a layer that floats on top of your page content, which is termed a modal. So most of the time that has a darker background or a lighter background that fades the visual of the page behind it, so you can focus on that modal. Now, for a sighted user, it makes perfect sense. I stay inside the modal, I know what I'm doing. For a non-sighted user, we now need to, or for accessible user, we now need to tell the browser that you're now in a modal, which is a breakout room of that page. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff we need to do and keep the user inside that modal until they tell you I want to leave it or close it.
Right.
Sighted user just clicks the X or the close button, but a non-sighted user doesn't see any of that. So they can continue to tab. So we need to make sure we're staying in. So does this attribute kind of fire off those types of things? Or typically we had to write a whole bunch of JavaScript.
Right. And actually, Shaq and I have sat down together and literally written all the JavaScript that would be needed in order to support Aria modal. So Aria modal was introduced in 2017. So it's brand new property, introduced in Aria 1.1. I tested it in Safari 12 and Chrome 88, and they work. And I can even show Firefox, has yet to support this attribute. So each browser has its own, what they call accessibility API. And so it is communicating out, to any assistive technology this is what the page is, and this is what the next element is, and this is that element's name. And so it's really up to the browser here to kind of support these attributes. But yeah, so the concept is if Aria modal is true, the background content behind that modal, everything in that accessibility tree should be hidden by browsers and hidden to those assistive technologies, so that only the modal content is perceived by users with a screen reader or even using a keyboard.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So this is awesome. Actually, so Aria modal was actually not even in the code of Bootstrap 4, I think, up until recently, a couple of maybe last year, 2020, that they actually started putting it on there. It was added on Bootstrap 4.2,
right.
Which means that we have to update all our boilerplates, or if we haven't.
Yeah.
And then it's also present in Bootstrap 5. So if you move on to Bootstrap 5, which is still in beta, you're good to go with Aria modal.
As of the recording of this.
As the recording of this, and hopefully, Firefox does support that property, which I'm sure they're on their way to doing so.
Right.
Okay, so let's take a look at that. So I'm going to do the same process here. Let's go to the authoring practices document, and let's look up modal, and which is this?
Yeah, that's it.
Hold on. And so 1.1 is the latest here, and we can go to modal.
Mortal. That's the.
So this is dialogue modal.
Right.
And so what I love about this is they actually have a full-on example. They have two examples. They've got one that's the kind of modal that we think of, and then here's another one that's kind of a date picker, which you may not even think of as being a modal, but it does have this kind of overlay, and you do want to ensure that the user stays within that date picker. And then as far as keyboard interaction, which thankfully Bootstrap handles a lot of this, you should be able to tab to move to the next element inside, but then if focused on the last one, it should move to the first one of the tabbable dialogue, the next element basically at the top, as opposed to starting to go through all the elements that are in the background of that modal. And same with Shift Tab and Escape. This is another one that sometimes gets missed if you're coding your own modal. Make sure that the Escape button closes the modal. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of show you the Bootstrap modal, and this should be a little bit easier. So I'm going to go to this. This is user preferences, and this is a modal. We've got a close button, and right here, if I inspect, you can see here that I've got this Aria modal equals true.
Got it. Yep.
Okay, so now if we go down to the next states here, Aria role states and properties, it says that it should have the role of dialogue, and that's the element that serves as the element container. And there's role dialogue here.
There you go.
Yep. And it says that all elements required to operate the dialogue are descendants in the role dialogue. So you can't have a close button that's outside of the dialogue. Yeah, it's got to be inside.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then you've got Aria modal equals true. So you can click on this and learn more about what Aria modal is, which basically what we described, it hides everything else and tells assistive technologies not to read the other stuff behind it. And then the dialogue itself should have a label or labeled by. And here we're doing labeled by. So we've got an ID of example modal, and inside here, we should have an ID of example modal, and that's holding the H2 here. And this could have been an H2.
I really like that because that is so that's your H2 is doing double duty, right? So it's your title of the dialog box / modal,
right?
But it's also now you've just made that accessible for the modal itself.
Exactly. Yeah.
I like it.
All right, cool.
This is pretty powerful. What I like about this is it is an example of an accessible attribute that is highly specific to a very specific function of a user interface.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, I guess if that's what we're kind of wrapping this around, you have a toggle button, does something very specific. A modal window, and you know, you're not using them all the time, but when they're using them from an accessibility standpoint, they're a bit of a pain in the neck. Like, how do you address that? How do you handle something that is by default a very visual thing?
Right.
How do we make that accessible? And with these very specific ARIA labels, it allows us to do that.
Right. So we're coding things that don't exist in native HTML. These are people being creative with JavaScript and CSS and saying, you know, hey, actually, I can put this, this div over here and gray everything else out, and you know, it works to a user with a keyboard, with like a mouse or touch screen. Yep. But maybe it's not working with your keyboard user out of the box. So I think if you walk away with anything, it's check out authoring practices, the Aria authoring practices. And if you're thinking about a new component that you want to build from scratch, check these out. Or if you've got some third-party component that you've never used before and you're not sure if it's accessible, you know, go through all the properties that they say it should have to ensure that it's accessible for keyboard and screen reader users.
And we'll make sure all the links to what Nick showed are going to be down in the show notes. So
yeah. And let me test this. So I'm going to show you just with a screen reader what this looks like with Aria modal equals true. So we're going to test this this user preferences button.
VoiceOver on Safari. Hard refresh template window. 4K remastered. Selected top form controls menu. You are currently in the VoiceOver menu. This is a list of watch later button. Share pop-up button. Play button. 4K remastered. User preferences button. User preferences button. You are currently on a button. To click this button, press Control Option. Press User Preferences Web Dialog. You are currently on Web Dialog inside of Web Content. To interact with items in this group, press Control Option Shift down arrow. To exit this web area, press Control Option Shift up arrow.
So the first thing it said it's a web dialog, which is that role dialog equals true. And now I'm going to hold down Control Option and go through all the elements. And then the expectation is that when I get to the bottom of this page, it's not going to read anything else. And then when I get to the top of the page, it's not going to read anything else. And I haven't done anything else to the background elements here.
User preferences, web dialog, and user close, closing this modal without submitting will not save your changes.
So I can't go past.
That's amazing. I remember all the pain that we've had to go through to keep a user inside of a modal. We'd have to say, well, what's the last element or last link, and make sure when you hit that, make the next one the first one we do use arrays to do that.
Yeah.
Basically, this now is, tab or arrow down through it, or go all the or go back up in an actual. So there's no loop. It's like a logical. I went down through all the elements. Now I go back up through the elements, and I can't go past the last one, and I can't go past the first one.
Right. And if I'm a keyboard user and I just hit tab here, I'm in a loop of basically not only the modal, but I'm also going back up through the Chrome of the browser, which that would be impossible for us to code normally.
Yeah. That's a Safari. Is that a Safari thing?
Yeah, I think Chrome does that too.
All right. So this is cool. This is actually a curb cut thing for me. This is something that actually makes the page much more usable. It's accessible and it's going to be used by that particular audience. But if you know this trick, it makes it a lot easier for you to, especially if you're a power user and you like using the keyboard to move around.
Yeah. And
this is cool. This is very, very cool.
And then also for power users, if you're writing your own modal, just make sure that you're also detecting the escape button to close out the modal. Bootstrap has that already as part of their code. But yeah, so I'm going to hit escape here, and it closes, and it returns focus to the button that launched it.
I like when a lot of this stuff is done for you, especially since we had to figure all this out and write all this stuff from scratch years ago.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's great. Awesome.
So this was an example of something again that it's not working on Firefox. Originally for us, I think it was just working on Safari. Now it works on Chrome too. So we've got a good user base here with the way this works.
Right, and that's the thing. Like, look at your analytics, look at your user base, look at what your users are using from a browser standpoint. You're not going to get the amount of users that are using accessible features. That's certainly a privacy issue. But I think we've talked about that on previous casts as well. But at the end of the day, it's making these pages and these sites more usable across the board, just for everybody in general. And honestly, that's what inclusive design is all about. So
yeah,
very cool. I like these. So thanks for watching. We love your feedback, your questions, your comments. Leave them down below. Hit that subscribe button. Click that little bell notification so you find out when we upload new stuff. So Nick, if you got any parting words, if not, I can do our sign off.
I have no parting words. Just...
All right. All right. This is Chuck. And for Nick, this is Hard Refresh.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.
All right. Thanks, guys.